The scream ripped through the wet evening as tires hissed on the glistening crosswalk. "I'm dying at all." Ava rushed forward, coat flaring, eyes wide. A 78-year-old woman teetered off balance as the signal blinked red. Ava said, "I've got you, ma'am," and her voice steadied the panic. The old woman clutched a cane and a silver locket that flashed like a tiny lighthouse. A horn blasted, and a sedan fishtailed at the line. Ava guided her across, shoulders squared against the traffic's breath. The woman whispered, "Too late," and the words iced the air. Ava noticed the locket's crest, a hawk over 3 stars, identical to a hidden photo from her childhood. She reached to steady it and felt a seam pop. The locket's hinge gave way, and a folded strip slid free. Ava said, "Where did you get this?" and shock gripped her throat. In a startling impulse, she palmed the strip as if saving it from the street, and the woman stared, wounded and afraid. Ava reached the curb and the city seemed to hold its breath. She unfolded the strip just enough to see a name scorched into her memory. Elias Ward. Her father's name. She had never heard it spoken in years. The elderly woman's voice thinned with fear. The woman said, "You should not carry that." Ava said, "He was my father," and the confession shocked even her. The sedan edged forward, then stopped again as if listening. Ava offered the locket back, but the woman's fingers stayed curled. The old woman said, "They watch for the crest, not for us." Sirens murmured far off, muffled by rain. Ava felt heat rise through the cold and knew this was no accident. The paper warmed in her hand like a live coal. The crosswalk timer reset, and the city resumed its pulse. Ava said, "Tell me who gave you this," and hope and dread tangled in her voice. The elderly woman scanned the corners like a hunted bird. The woman said, "A friend of your mother, years ago," and pain softened her gaze. Ava's breath hitched at the word, "mother." The sedan's window rose and sealed, and the engine idled with a cat's patience. A courier bike hissed by, splashing their shoes. The woman said, "If you read it here, you invite teeth," and her stare cut to the car. Ava slipped the strip into a pocket sewn inside her coat. She said, "Then let's move," and took the woman's arm again, steady as a vow. They reached a bus shelter where plastic panels rattled in the wind. A poster peeled at the corner, revealing old tape like scars. Ava said, "What is on the strip?" and her eyes pressed for truth. The woman said, "Dates and a location," and looked down. Ava felt the old ache of missing years open again. The shelter light flickered and steadied, casting soft shadows on their faces. The woman said, "They erased his name, but not the places he touched." Ava's grip tightened on the cane for balance and comfort. A bus rumbled nearer, haloed in spray. Ava said, "I can meet you again," and risk vibrated through the words. The bus hissed to a stop and doors parted with a sigh. The elderly woman stepped forward, then paused. The woman said, "You were kind, and then you were reckless," and grief folded her features. Ava said, "I will return it," and held out the locket with both hands. The woman accepted it, but her stare weighed the choice. She whispered, "Elias trusted the wrong light," and climbed aboard. Ava watched the bus pull away, tail lights painting the rain red. She felt the strip against her heart, ticking like a watch. Ava said, "I will find you," though the glass swallowed the promise. The sedan slipped into traffic, and the night closed in. Dawn pooled in Ava's small apartment like quiet apology. The kettle clicked and she counted her breaths. Ava said, "Not today," though the folded strip pressed against her ribs. A chipped mug steamed beside a faded photo of her mother. Nooned. She tucked the picture back into a shoebox of report cards and letters. And when outside, tires hissed on leftover rain, and gulls argued with the light. A neighbor's child knocked and asked for tape for a broken workbook. Ava said, "Bring it here," and knelt, fixing the torn spine with slow care. The child said, "Thanks, Miss Ava," and hurried off. Silence returned, tender and heavy. Ava touched the locket's outline through her coat, and wondered who she had been before the questions found her. The classroom smelled of markers and damp coats. Ava drew a curve on the board and the room shushed. A 12-year-old boy fidgeted, eyes red from a sleepless night. Ava said, "Malik, sit up here with me," and offered a pencil. Malik said, "I'm fine." But his voice buckled. She slid a granola bar onto his desk like a secret treaty. The class watched, safe in the ritual of kindness. Ava said, "We solved this one together," and drew another line. Malik breathed, counted, and found the answer. The room exhaled as if it had been holding breath just for him. The staff room buzzed with vending hum and stale coffee. The principal skimmed a spreadsheet without looking up. Mr. Kincaid said, "Your attendance calls are beyond scope," and tapped a cell. Ava said they need extra eyes and kept her voice even. He shrugged like budget cuts were weather. Mr. Kincaid said, "Stay instructional," and stood to leave. She nodded, cheeks warm, pride stung by the smallness of the room. A poster about excellence curled at the corners like a tired smile. Ava said, "I will do my job," and folded her hands. The locket pressed a counter-argument against her palm. After school, the city wore its wet fatigue. Ava climbed cracked stairs to a third-floor walk-up with a paper bag of groceries. A 70-year-old grandmother opened the door with a wary smile. The woman said, "You are the teacher," and stepped aside. Ava said, "Just Ava," and set rice and tea on the counter. The apartment breathed boiled cabbage and soap. The woman said, "He sleeps when thunder talks," and nodded toward a small bedroom. Ava left a note with office hours and her number. The woman pressed Ava's hand with both of hers and did not speak. Kindness filled the room like a steady lamp. Night folded back over the apartment, and the city kept its secrets. Ava set her phone face down and opened the shoebox again. A voicemail icon blinked like a cautious heartbeat. A filtered voice said, "Elias Ward is not a memory," and ended. Ava said, "Who are you?" But only the refrigerator answered. She unfolded the strip and traced the letters in the lamplight. Wanikawe. Dates marched beside a waterfront address, as if time could be pinned. She closed her eyes and saw the hawk and 3 stars. Ava said, "I am not running," and felt the words take root. The room waited, and so did the night beyond the glass. The waterfront address led Ava past shuttered warehouses where gulls stitched the fog. Salt burned her throat, and the pilings creaked like old bones. A rusted gate bore the hawk over 3 stars in flaking paint. Ava said, "You again," and touched the emblem as if it might answer. A 33-year-old dock worker stepped from a shadow, cap low, eyes worried. The man said, "You should not linger here," and scanned the road. Ava said, "I am looking for Elias Ward," and felt the name scrape the air. The man said, "Names sink faster than anchors," and slipped a folded receipt into her palm. The receipt showed a storage unit number and 3 dates that matched her strip. Ava said, "Who sent you?" But the man had already melted into the fog. The river lapped like a clock counting down. The city archives breathed dust and humming fluorescence. Microfiche screens glowed like small moons in a dim sea. I'd point. Ava fed coins and threaded a reel with stubborn hands. Headlines bloomed with her father's name beside a senator's smiling portrait. Ava said, "You knew something," and the whisper fogged the glass. A 60-year-old librarian watched from the desk with gentle suspicion. The librarian said, "Some stories were cut to fit the page," and slid over a box of clippings. Ava found ledger scans, shell companies, and a photo of the hawk crest on a fundraiser banner. Her pulse climbed the ribs like a ladder. Ava said, "He tried to warn them," and printed the page until the machine coughed. Outside, rain returned like an accomplice. The diner smelled of coffee, fried onions, and old secrets. A 52-year-old journalist named Rafi waited in a corner booth with a recorder and a tired smile. Rafi said, "Your voicemail was brief," and slid a photograph across the formica. The photo showed Elias standing near the same crest, eyes fierce, smile absent. Ava said, "He looks like a warning," and traced the edge with one finger. Rafi said, "He gathered proof and vanished when the story went bad," and lowered his voice. Neon shivered across the window as a sedan idled outside like a thought that refused to leave. Ava said, "Who benefits if he stays erased?" and met his gaze head-on. Rafi said, "A machine with polished shoes," and tapped a name that matched her clippings. The waitress topped off their cups, and the room felt suddenly temporary. The sedan tailed Ava from the diner with patient distance. Streetlight stitched a dotted line along wet asphalt. Ava said, "Not tonight," and cut through a parking garage that echoed like a drum. Concrete pillars slid past like gray trees. A 40-year-old male driver in a dark cap stepped out and scanned for her reflection in glass. Ava crouched behind a column and dialed Rafi with steady hands. Rafi said, "Do not go home," and the warning vibrated through the static. Footsteps clicked, paused, then turned toward the exit ramp. Ava said, "I still have the strip," and felt its edges like teeth against her palm. A car door thumped shut, and the engine retreated into the rain. Her heartbeat learned a new pace. The storage facility sat by the river with lights that never slept. Ava entered the code from the receipt, and the gate shrugged open. Corridors of orange doors stretched like orderly secrets. She found Unit 317, and felt a tremor in the quiet. Ava said, "Please be real," and lifted the roll-up door with careful hands. Inside waited boxes, labeled with dates that matched the strip. A ledger lay open to a page that tied the crest to the senator's donor network. A keycard and a cassette tape rested beside a torn photograph of her mother. Ava said, "You left me a map and swallowed the ache." A motion sensor blinked red, and somewhere a relay clicked alive. She took the ledger and locked the door with shaking fingers. Ava reached Lena's loft as rain threaded the fire escape like quiet wire. The buzzer rasped, and the door clicked, almost guilty. Lena stood barefoot in paint-stained joggers, eyes rimmed with worry. Lena said, "You look wired," and tried a smile that would not stay. Ava set the ledger on the counter and watched Lena flinch at the crest. Ava said, "How do you know this mark?" and her voice steadied like a blade. Lena said, "Please sit," but she did not sit. The room smelled of acrylic and old coffee, and the cassette felt heavy in Ava's pocket. Ava said, "You kept calling when the sedan followed me, and waited for the lie." Lena looked at the window, then at the door, then at Ava. "That," Lena said, "because I knew they would," and the floor seemed to tilt. The city hummed below, bright and far, as if it belonged to other lives. Ava set a battered tape player on the counter and pressed play. Elias Ward's voice rose from static like an ember refusing to die. He named the crest, the senator, and money laundered as charity. Ava said, "He sounds frightened," and her breath shook. Lena snapped stop with a practiced thumb. Lena said, "He asked me to keep you away from this," and her face folded. Ava said, "He knew you," and the word braided past and present. Lena said, "Your mother made me promise," and tears balanced but did not fall. The rain thickened and hammered the glass like a deadline. Ava said, "You lied for years and hurt sharpened every syllable." Lena said, "I hid you from wolves and the echo did not comfort." The tape whirred in the silent room like a clock with no hands. Lena paced, bare feet whispering against paint flecks. Lena said, "They watched the locket, not you," and swallowed hard. Ava said, "So the crest was a beacon, and the word tasted like metal." Lena said, "A fixer named Marlowe kept score," and she rubbed her wrist. Ava said, "How long have you fed him crumbs?" and anger pared her voice to bone. Lena said, "Since your mother vanished," and shame moved across her face. Ava said, "You tipped them the diner," and the neon memory stung. Lena said, "I sent decoys too," and pointed to a muted burner phone. Guilt fogged the room like breath on cold glass. Ava said, "You chose for me," and the distance grew between them. Lena said, "I chose to keep you alive," and the choice sounded small. The ledger waited, patient as a verdict. A car door slammed in the alley like a thrown stone. Lena killed the lights, and the loft turned to shadow and breath. A red dot blinked on the intercom like a tiny wound. Ava said, "They are here," and reached for the tape. Lena said backstairs and grabbed a hoodie. Footsteps climbed, slow and certain, like someone reading a list. Ava said, "Did you invite them?" and did not wait for the answer. Lena said, "I sent a false lead to buy time," and pulled Ava toward the service door. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and old mail. A knuckle rapped 3 times, polite and lethal. They moved downward into the dark until the city found them again. They reached the alley and hid beneath a rattling awning. Steam rose from a street grate like a tired ghost. Lena pressed a small key into Ava's palm and closed her fingers. Lena said, "Box 19 at Harbor Trust," and her voice steadied by force. Ava said, "What is inside?" and did not blink. Lena said, "Original tapes and a donor ledger with names that still answer phones," and the rain hushed. Ava said, "And you waited until now, and the hurt found its pitch." Lena said, "Because the gala is tomorrow, and the crest will be on every banner," and her eyes burned. Ava said, "Then we end it there," and the promise sounded like steel. The sedan slid past the mouth of the alley and did not stop. They stood in the rain, together and not, while the city counted their breaths. Morning found Harbor Trust, scrubbed of personality and polished like a mirror. Ava signed the ledger while a clock ticked with surgical calm. Lena stood beside her, hoodie damp at the cuffs. The clerk slid a tray and said, "Box 19, please." Ava fit the tiny key and felt the tumblers accept her. Inside lay 3 cassettes, a donor ledger, and a sealed note addressed in her mother's hand. Ava said, "She wrote to me," and the room lost its temperature. Lena said, "Photograph everything," and unrolled a cloth for the items. Footsteps passed in the corridor and receded like a threat reconsidered. Ava opened the note and read a single line about truth owed to the living. She said, "We take it to the gala," and closed the box on the empty space it left behind. Rafi's office pulsed with scanners and the smell of warm dust. Rafi said, "The gala streams at 8, and the senator loves a live camera." Ava placed the ledger on his desk and watched his eyes harden. Rafi said, "These names still buy power," and tapped a column. Lena set the cassettes down and slid a tiny mic across. Lena said, "Patch this into their PA, then trigger from the AV rack." Ava said, "If I do this, my kids will see me on the news," and the fear tasted like iron. Rafi said, "They will see you keep a promise," and held up 2 press lanyards. Rain rattled the window like impatient knuckles. Ava said, "We publish a backup first," and sent scans to a secure drive. The upload bar crawled, stubborn and alive. The gala burned gold against a wet night, banners stitched with the hawk and 3 stars. A quartet played optimism in polite time. Security scanned badges like customs at a border of manners. Ava said, "Eyes up," and stepped into the ballroom with a press lanyard and steady breath. Lena drifted toward the AV booth with a caterer's tray and a borrowed smile. Rafi settled into the press pen and raised a camera that had seen wars. The senator strode across the stage, 58 years polished to a sheen, and shook hands with donors who applauded their own reflections. Ava slipped behind a velvet rope and traced the cable to the mixer. She said, "When he thanks the crowd, we cut in," and the plan found its pulse. Backstage smelled of dust, perfume, and hot circuitry. The senator stepped into the wings and smoothed his cuff. The senator said, "You look like someone's trouble," and his gaze found Ava. Ava said, "I inherited it," and held his eyes as if they were a locked door. He leaned closer, voice silk over wire. The senator said, "Walk away and I forget your face." Ava said, "You forgot my father's," and the air cut. A guard raised a hand toward his earpiece. Lena's whisper crackled, "Channel 2 is live." Ava slid the cassette into the deck and pressed play. Elias Ward's voice climbed out of the speakers like light under a door. The senator's smile failed to find his mouth. The ballroom froze as the tape named the crest, the Shell Trusts, and the senator's private ledger. Gasps fractured the applause like dropped glass. Ralphie's stream lit up with comments that moved faster than panic. The senator said, "Deepfake," but the word arrived without conviction. Ava stepped onto the edge of the stage and lifted the ledger so the cameras could read it. Ava said, "These entries match the tapes and the filings you buried," and her voice did not shake. Security advanced, cautious and late. Lena cut the house lights to a dim blue that felt like truth. Raffi said, "We are live to syndicates," and hit send. The room learned what it means when a symbol is only paint. Sirens stitched the gala's curb, while umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers. Reporters shouted, and the chandeliers bled blue from police lights. The senator said, "This is political theater," yet his voice frayed on the edges. Ava said, "It is evidence," and did not step back. A 46-year-old female detective lifted a brow and took the ledger into chain of custody. Raffi said, "We are mirrored to 3 servers and a paper press," and checked his watch. Lena said, "They tried the back exit," and nodded toward a man in a cap. The detective said, "We have him," as officers guided the fixer into a car. The senator said, "You will be sued." And the promise sounded tired. Ava said, "So be it," and the rain gentled as if the night exhaled. Somewhere, the tape kept playing in 100 open tabs. In the newsroom, monitors glowed like small dawns against the storm. Raffi said, "We published the transcripts with sourcing notes," and began to type. Ava said, "Include the crest's origin and the fundraiser shell," and slid copies over. Lena said, "I mirrored video to offline drives and locked a case." A young producer said legal, cleared the audio as journalistic interest, and grinned in relief. Raffi said, "Your mother's line closes the piece," and tapped the final paragraph. Ava said, "Truth owed to the living," and the room hushed with respect. The upload bar finished and sent light across the screens. Phones chirped like a flock turning in air. Outside, the rain finally broke. Morning found the district office smelling of coffee and floor wax. A 55-year-old male investigator said, "We will move on warrants today," and opened a folder. Ava said, "I will testify," and signed her statement with a steady hand. Lena said, "My calls, my decoys, all logged," and passed a phone wrapped in evidence tape. Raffi said, "Chain of custody is documented across outlets," and placed the ledger receipts. The investigator said, "Your father predicted the funnel entries here and pointed to dates." Ava said, "He wanted someone to finish what he started," and closed her eyes once. Pens scratched like small storms across paper. Outside, sirens rose and then fell into traffic. The moment felt like a hinge turning right. Back at school, the hall smelled of pencil shavings and drier warm coats. Malik lifted a hand and said, "Did you win?" and Hope cracked his whisper. Ava said, "We told the truth," and drew a line on the board like a horizon. The class leaned in the way flowers lean toward light. Mr. Kincaid said, "Your room has coverage if you need time," and stood awkwardly at the door. Ava said, "We are fine," and passed out worksheets that felt like anchors. A girl said, "My grandma saw you on TV," and smiled to share the weight. Ava said, "Then she knows we keep our promises," and the room relaxed. Outside, sun finally threaded the clouds into bright cloth. At the river, the fog had thinned to silk and gulls traced quiet arcs. The 78-year-old woman waited at the railing with a cane, and the locket shining. The woman said, "You did what he could not," and her eyes softened. Ava said, "He left a path," and rested her palms on cold steel. The woman said, "The crest meant danger, but it also meant witness," and held the locket close. Ava said, "Keep it," and the offer felt like breath released. The woman said, "You belong to the living now," and smiled without fear. Ava watched a barge shoulder the water and felt the world widen. She said, "I will go home by the long streets," and turned toward the city. The wind no longer smelled like regret. Morning news stitched headlines across the city like fresh bandages. Ava stepped into clean sunlight and felt the day answer back. A courthouse door sighed as lawyers hurried past with nerves in their pockets. A reporter asked for a quote and held out a microphone like a truce. Ava said, "Let the filings speak," and kept moving. Her phone buzzed with a message from the 46-year-old female detective. The detective said, "Warrants executed, custody maintained, and relief widened the street." Rafi said, "Front page and paper run on speaker," and the ink felt like ballast. Lena said, "I am here," and the words landed without apology or excuse. Ava paused beneath a hawk crest on a torn banner and watched it lift in the breeze. She said, "You are only paint," and the symbol finally looked small. The loft smelled of soap and rain-faded paint. Canvases leaned like tired witnesses, and the kettle sang a brief apology. Lena stood with sleeves pushed up and a careful steadiness in her voice. Lena said, "I should have said everything sooner," and folded her arms to keep from shaking. Ava said, "You kept me alive, and you kept me from knowing, and let the balance stand." Lena nodded and held out a small box of decoy phones and scribbled maps. Lena said, "No more half-truths," and set the box by the door. Ava said, "No more wolves," and the room found its level. They labeled a new folder with dates in clean ink and closed the drawer softly. Outside, the city rinsed itself in sun and glass. Forgiveness arrived without spectacle and chose to stay. The cemetery sat on a hill where wind braided grass into whispers. Ava found her mother's stone and brushed grit from the carved name with her sleeve. She unfolded the note again and traced the line about truth, ode to the living. Ava said, "I carried it to the end," and the words did not waver. A groundskeeper passed with respectful distance and let the quiet hold. Ava placed a small pressed flower inside the envelope and sealed it with breath. She set the letter into a weatherproof box at the base like a folded horizon. Ava said, "I will teach the long way," and smiled at the thought of tomorrow's class. Clouds thinned to silk and let blue build a roof above everything. The ache softened into space that could be walked. At home, the shoebox waited with its old economy of grief. Ava laid everything out on the table as if setting a measured feast. She scanned photos, tagged dates, and trimmed the excess with steady hands. Ava said, "You can rest to the fragments that had once been anchors." She slipped the locket's rubbing, the keys ribbon, and one photo into a new envelope. The rest went into a file marked with the case number and a quiet period. Ava brewed tea and let the kettle click into finished silence. The apartment listened like a friend who did not hurry her. Sun pooled on the wood and warmed the grain into amber. She opened the window and let traffic write a softer rhythm. Evening gathered without menace and offered a clean street. Ava reached the same crosswalk where the night had first cracked open. A stroller wheel caught in the curb and a young father fumbled in surprise. Ava said, "I have you," and freed the wheel with a steady tug. The father said, "Thank you," and the gratitude felt ordinary and perfect. Traffic waited with patience Ava had not expected from the world. She stepped back to the sidewalk and tasted rainless air. Her pockets held only keys, chalk dust, and a folded lesson plan. Ava said, "I am going home," and the unburdened truth shone like a small bright coin. The light changed, and the city moved with her instead of against her.